I now invite His Excellency Evo Morales Ayma, President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, to address the Assembly.
Hermano
President of the Permanent Forum, Vice Chair of the UNGA, ambassadors, delegates, Indigenous brothers and sisters from throughout the world. It's a great honor to welcome you all here in this 10th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I would also like to welcome the international organizations, the special guests, friends of the press, and all of those who are working from the United Nations system to bring us together. Every time I come and I direct my words to brothers and sisters of the indigenous peoples of the world, I recall always the resistance, the courage of the indigenous peoples who inhabit this planet Earth. I first of all remember my life from childhood to through adolescence in my original community, the Isayal community of the Ondoro department. And I remember very clearly how, as a child, the community lived in solidarity and complementarity and in harmony with Mother Earth. And I would like to tell you that my experiences, the values that I had from the community, particularly the family, my parents, not to lie, not to steal, not to be weak in any way. And this has remained with me throughout my life. I'd also like to tell you, brothers and sisters, that in the absence of a colonial entity in the Andean mountains, and before the climatic changes, we had two enemies at that time: the lack of the colonial powers, and there was no drought to deal with either. Correction, there was drought and we had to deal with this. Therefore, we had to emigrate and move into the urban areas in Cochabambino. And I would like to say that there we found an agrarian trade union. Bolivia has many specificities in each region, in the Altiplano and in the areas where we were now based. The indigenous people found these agrarian trade unions, and the three important regions, the trade unions were like the state, and they dealt with problems relating to health, with education, and represented the state which was absent. And all that the state did was to take away our community land, or to change the way that we were living in collective communities. And even now, where I lived, the land is communal land, and this is known as communism by the West. However, the agrarian trade union in Cochabamba was a great school for me, where I learnt a great deal to understand the situation not only for the indigenous peasants, but to understand and then later to mobilize and organize us for, as we fought for the rights of the peasants, facing the presence of the North American military, because there was a North American military base there in that region. And this obliged us in that tropical area of Cochabambino to identify the internal and external enemies for Bolivia. During this process, I would like to state, brothers and sisters, that there was a permanent battle of organization and mobilization in the 1980s and 1990s. And I remember, and will always remember, that our international leaders in 1991 invited us to Quetzaltenango in Guatemala to debate over the 500 years of resistance made by the indigenous peoples. And I was so impressed by the debate by these ex-leaders. There we were planning 500 years from 1492, based on the 500 years of invasion by Europeans on the continent. And we set forth 3 plans. 500 years, the 10 years that we're celebrating now, the United Nations should create an indigenous international fund. And we also proposed that there should be a Nobel Peace Prize for fighting for the recognition of indigenous rights. And in the immediate past, threatened by plans and programs that would seek to exterminate us and our way of life. In 1992, we participated in Managua, Nicaragua, and had the responsibility to organize with our national leaders important activities relating to deliberations about the 500 years of invasion by Europeans in America. And the solutions of the resistance is taking over power, which we ourselves, as absolute owners of this land, should bring about. That we should end this governance with policies and programs that have been imported into our country. This was a great resolution. I would simply like to say, brothers and sisters, that this undertaking of 1992 in Bolivia was something that we brought about thanks to the awareness raising of the Bolivian people. But I'd also like to point out that there was something still outstanding. We've gone through this decade without any real results. There's no real fund for the indigenous people, although thanks to many international organizations, our brother Dimorche Menchu has won the Nobel Prize. And I remember the debate over this. How could the United Nations declare the rights of the indigenous peoples in the world? And here we are, celebrating after so many years. We are celebrating the 10th anniversary of this declaration. Brothers and sisters, I'd like to recall also our battles have not only been for our claims at sectoral level or at regional level or in a fragmented manner. In Bolivia, particularly, the indigenous movement has brought together other sectors workers, the middle class, transport workers, everyone united, fighting to bring about a new Bolivia. The fight for dignity, with unity, equality, political sovereignty, are all equally important. Brothers and sisters, the fight of the indigenous peoples is not only to satisfy our needs as we move forward in the history of Bolivia. All of the issues interest us. There are no issues where we cannot or should not be involved. Brothers and sisters, throughout the centuries, our peoples have been able to resist invasions, the sacking by invaders, and after the policies of genocide, they have sought to extinguish our identity. But our indigenous peoples, we know very well this history. Indigenous peoples have been herded into reserves. Africans were made slaves. We were condemned by courts, by the so-called Holy Inquisition. We were not able to walk through our own streets, go to the same places. We were marginalized, segregated in education, not given the same health care, and not even provided with basic services. The indigenous peoples throughout the world, including in Africa, share the same history, and therefore we support those who are fighting against slavery, and we believe that there should be proper compensation for slavery. For 500 years of submitting to the sacking of our resources, and we still have not received any compensation for that. To date, the empire is now seeking to build walls, to push out refugees, to impose norms that would not serve our needs. When the Europeans invaded us, we didn't set up any walls, nor do we set up programs against them. Those who have invaded us are setting up barriers, frontiers, walls. And there are walls and military bases throughout the world. Imperialism, neocolonialism has meant that the world is undergoing a series of crises, and these are crises relating to the system itself, the consequences of this multiplicity of crises. And we can see them in the streets of many cities throughout the world, in the countryside, and in power relations. I would like to say to everyone here, brothers and sisters, everyone in the world, war is a direct product of capitalism. To appropriate the natural resources, to set up military bases. Military bases, in fact, require war. In our experience, those who support capitalism and neocolonialism is promoting war. This is our experience as indigenous peoples. The invasion in Iraq, please listen to my words, in 2003 provoked To date, more than 1 million deaths. The war in Syria, which has gone on for more than 6 years, has caused the death of more than 400,000 people. The intervention in Libya caused more than 50,000 deaths. The crisis of inequality, which is represented in the divide, which is becoming ever greater between the poor and the rich. According to the Oxfam report, 8 individuals has the same wealth as 800,000 people. That means over half the population of the world. Can you imagine this? Only 8 people have the wealth that half of the population of the world possess. And this is becoming worse and has exacerbated over the last few years. Therefore, for the rich, there is no crisis. They are continuing to accumulate wealth on the backs of the poor of the world. The humanitarian crisis is a product of the conflicts in the world. We are going through the worst humanitarian crisis over the last 70 years. More than 120 million people require humanitarian aid across 23 countries, and more than 40 million have been internally displaced. More than 21 million are refugees, and more than 3 million are requesting asylum. This humanitarian crisis can also be seen in the more than 20 million people who are suffering from famine or risk of famine in various parts of the world. The financial crisis has been generated by the banks. They are those who are controlling the world. They control the financial system, and they promote fiscal tax havens. And there is the true government of the world. There's no election for them, but they do still govern. And the energy crisis, as far as the World Bank is concerned, 100 million people do not have access to energy, whether to electricity, and another 2,900,000 depend on wood and charcoal in order to cook their food and as a heating means. And therefore, peoples and civilizations are not able to meet their needs. Petrol is in the hands of whom? And who benefits from petrol and oil? The crisis relating to water, according to the United Nations, 1,800 million people are drinking water which is not clean. When water and other basic services has become a goods to be paid for, one is thinking only about making money and not taking care of people. In Bolivia, all of basic services are provided. The climate crisis this year has been, in 2016, it was the hottest year of the world, with levels of consumption, deforestation, industrialization that have generated an excess of greenhouse gases, which has caused the increase of temperature and natural disasters that have affected all of us, but particularly the countries of the South and future generations. The food crisis More than 800 million people are suffering from hunger. Many live in the countryside, in rural areas, mostly in Asia and Africa, where malnutrition is the cause of half of the deaths of children under the age of 5 years. Desertification and soil degradation of productive areas for food, the monopolization and commercialization of agricultural inputs, speculation on prices of food, consumerism are further causes of this dramatic situation which faces us. The institutional crisis expressed by the structures of the international system, the Economic Social Council, the Monetary Fund, the World Bank. These decisions are not taken democratically. The United States holds control in all of these institutions through its veto, and the large multinational companies are distorting the reality and are hiding information with the objective of maintaining power relations and protecting the imperial interests. The crisis on the horizon have sought to impose on us a vision of one world that's all based on capitalism, as if history had ended, as if inequality, poverty, famine were the destiny of humanity. That's the reality that is facing the world. Our Mother Earth is threatened on all sides. The existence of the human family is in danger, and we have become the principal danger for humanity itself. But this reality, brothers and sisters, is our challenge. It's not our destiny. In the Millennium Fight, the indigenous peoples, as they fought against the invaders, colonialism, capitalism, we have shown that we can resist, and we must, that we are capable of making our own future, brothers and sisters. It's my duty to inform you of what we have achieved in Bolivia thanks to awareness raising amongst our people and the social bodies that have worked. We have recovered our identity, and as a consequence, our dignity and our sovereignty. We have recovered our land and our hope, and we are transforming this into a daily reality. Bolivia, with great pride, is able to state that at this point in time, it is the first country that is literate, 100% literate. We have no military bases from the United States on our territory. Bolivia is free of the monetary fund, and we have been defining our own monetary policies without any impositions from outside. Bolivia is free of doctrines, of military bases, and has been able to recover its sovereignty and its strategic companies. It's so important to have control over our natural resources. We have an economy which has grown more than any other in the region. Because when we took over the presidency 11 years ago, it was the second to last country in America, in South America, for 2 consecutive years. We are one of the countries with the most economic growth now. We have reduced our abject poverty levels from 38.2% in 2006 to 17.2% in 2016. In 2025, we hope that we will be able to have eradicated all poverty. Bolivia has made sure that inequality does not exist as much as before. The figure in 2006 has been brought down to by 225 times. 10% used to have 37 times more than the 10% of the most poor. That's what we have managed to achieve. We're the second country in the world with the largest number of women in our parliaments and in our congresses. More than half are in our Plurinational Assembly. We are the country with the greatest indigenous male and female participation in our plurinational assemblies. Over the last 10 years, before the democratic and cultural revolution, the average of public investment was less than $15 million per year, and our government made an average investment of $500 million. It's a very small country, but we've been able to go in such a high level, and this is very important. We are constructing an alternative that has been very successful to capitalism by making sure that we no longer hold true to imperialistic and colonialistic values. This has meant that in our political order we have set up a plurinational system, and in our economy we have taken over the dominion of most of our natural resources and our strategic areas. In this social area, we've been able to redistribute wealth, and in the cultural sector we have recovered our identity and our dignity, and we have defended our sovereignty. Bolivia is the leading country in terms of converting laws into law, the Declaration of the Indigenous Peoples that was adopted by the United Nations. And I would like to say, with great humility, brothers and sisters, that what we have achieved in our countries such as mine is an example of what we're able to do on a global level. I would like to say, brothers and sisters, we have gone from a colonial state to a plurinational state, a country that was subjected to a country that is now sovereign, a country which is united against imperial power. And over years, I have been coming and listening to proposals and alternatives for the horizontal debate. What we have discussed, the principles we have discussed, the social movements within my country, the indigenous peoples of the world as a whole should be organized and mobilized to defend life and to defend the planet. And first of all, we suggest that we adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We defend the rights of Mother Nature. This is the only way to fight capitalism over exploitation of natural resources by constructing a new paradigm for production and consumption patterns and providing equality between peoples. This is how to live well, and to defend the rights to peace, to sovereignty, and to self-determination, eradicating imperialism. And to this end, we must favor complementarity, the construction of a multipolarized world. Thirdly, to reject any type of invasion by the use of force, any type of issues, because problems can be resolved through peaceful means, respecting the principle of sovereignty, of territorial integrity, to end with the arms war for mass destruction. Fourth, to fight for the recognition of universal citizenship, to put an end to walls, to frontiers, to marginalization and discrimination of people. Migration is inherent to humanity, and therefore, brothers and sisters, I take this opportunity to invite you to the World Conference of the Peoples for a world without walls, to achieve universal citizenship, which will take place on the 20th and 21st of June this year in Cochabamba, Bolivia, to construct a world in which we eradicate colonialism and neocolonialism, whether it be cultural or technological, a world where we cease to usurp the rights of others, where the human family is able to share the basis of solidarity instead of marketing its knowledge to improve the quality of life for all in harmony with Mother Earth, to continue to achieve our history and our identity as indigenous peoples, to eradicate racism and xenophobia and all types of discrimination, to fight so that basic services are recognized as a basic human right by the United Nations, and that in each state, both water, communications, as well as energy, which are indispensable for life, are not in the hands of private companies, but are publicly owned, to work so that we can respect the multilateralism, the principle of equality, sovereignty of states, as well as of our communities, so that we can resolve conflicts relating to differences on the basis of dialogue and consensus. The international organization should work in the same manner, eradicating whatever unilateral act there is, to create a world with a new economic order where commercial interests are based on the complementarity and solidarity, not simply to achieve mercantilist aims, to work with the peoples of the world to unite social movements for workers, both in rural and urban areas, to provide solidarity, to fight against the most pressing needs of the world, the liberalization of stigma, peace in Colombia, to end the economic blockade against Cuba. The coup d'etat in Venezuela, to construct a world with a legal democracy that is participatory, so that those who govern take into account the needs of their people, without oligarchies, without hierarchies, without financial anarchy, a world in which political action is destined to the service of life, and that there is an ethical and moral undertaking with our citizens, particularly the most vulnerable. Brothers and sisters, our indigenous peoples are the moral compass of humanity. We are peoples with identities, with wisdom, with our own ways of organization and production. The fight of the indigenous peoples' movements is anti-capitalist and anti-colonialist. Our grandparents suffered and fought against invasion. Our fathers fought against European colonialism and colonial states. To conclude, brothers and sisters, our responsibility is to organize the global fight to save humanity and to save the world. Thank you so much for your attention.